Americans by immigration agents. You're listening to NPR News.
Good morning. You're listening to WJCT News, 89.9 in Jacksonville. I'm Stephen Ponson. It's 9:04. The conversation around horses continues tonight in St. Augustine after the City Commission voted last month to end its relationship with the biggest local horse and carriage company. City leaders are scheduled to discuss changes to rules surrounding horse-drawn carriages. Among other changes, the city revised ordinance would codify rules around horse safety to ensure that animals are getting breaks and that drivers caught abusing animals aren't able to conduct tours. The discussion is just one item on the St. Augustine City Commission agenda tonight. The meeting starts at 5 p.m. in the Alcazar Room at the historic Leitner Museum in downtown St. Augustine, and it will also be broadcast live on the city's website. The Sporting Jacks men's team opened its first USL championship season with a loss on Saturday night to Hartford Athletic. The team lost 3-0 in the first men's professional soccer match in Jacksonville in 9 years. More than 10,000 fans came out to see the match at Hodges Stadium at the University of North Florida. The next home match for Sporting Jacks will be on March 25th at 7 p.m. against Miami FC. It'll be a warm afternoon here in Northeast Florida with temperatures reaching the mid to upper 80s inland, and it'll be cooler out at the beaches. Our rain chances remain low. Tonight, fog is possible again for inland areas as lows will eventually drop down into the lower 60s area-wide. Mostly sunny skies expected tomorrow with highs reaching the upper 80s to near 90 inland and upper 70s to low 80s along the coast.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Eric and Wendy Schmidt through the Schmidt Family Foundation, working toward a healthy, resilient, secure world for all. On the web at theschmidt.org. This is NPR.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health and North Florida TPO.
Welcome to First Coast Connect. I'm Ann Schindler. Today, the politics of Everglades restoration. A sprawling new investigation explores the forces that shaped environmental policy in the River of Grass and landed its lead scientist in jail. Later in the program, from award-winning new films to the Spike Lee classic Do the Right Thing, we preview what's to come in the WJCT film series. But first, the new Rolling Stone cover story is titled A Billionaire, a Scientist, and a Secret in the Florida Everglades, and it focuses on the bitter divide between politics and science in the 1.5 million-acre wetland. Here to tell us about the reasons behind and impact of the ugly breakup is reporter Michael Adno. Michael, thanks for coming back on the program.
Thanks for having me, Ann.
So your story focuses on the rift that formed between two principals at the Everglades Foundation. That's sort of the lead nonprofit in the space of the Everglades, and it was a split between the foundation's CEO and its chief researcher. Tell us, first of all, about what the Everglades Foundation is, how it formed, and why it became so central to the overall restoration project.
So the foundation is basically this large scientific nonprofit that has worked for decades to basically coalesce all these groups that are working on restoration. So they're all of these different environmental nonprofits that are working on different environmental projects in South Florida. And it began in the 90s, and the idea was to kind of work on all these legislative and, kind of local projects to get people to work on the Everglades. It's this area the size of the state of Delaware. And it was really just kind of reconnecting all of these areas, like the plumbing of South Florida. And when basically that project began with this federal effort called the Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Project in 2000, what happened is that the foundation and other nonprofits, they changed gears in the sense that they started focusing on data and how to produce their own scientific reports. And from there, it just, they hired this kind of science staff, and that was meant to mirror these government agencies, is basically that they could fact check, the Army Corps. If they were going to say they were going to do this project, they could look at it with their own team and say whether or not that was going to work.
And
but
that
basically,
that was a shift. I mean, as you say, because the advocacy element or just working on legislation was sort of one pool of talent, but this was something, this shift and the need to be able to hold their own in conversations about complex hydrology or modeling. They needed their own scientific experts. Is that right?
yes, yeah, exactly. And that for them, was huge because they ultimately became the most influential nonprofit working in that space.
And so the Everglades Restoration Project, this is maybe now a $25 billion project. Tell us about it. You mentioned that it was approved by Congress in 2000, but tell us a little bit about what the vision is, the timeline that was initially anticipated, the cost that was initially anticipated. What is the comprehensive Everglades Restoration Project?
So basically, the Everglades, stretches almost the lower third of the state of Florida, right? From Lake Okeechobee, which is kind of in the heart of the state, all the way down to Florida Bay. And the Everglades is between that. And what happened is that in, 100 years ago, two hurricanes basically overflowed Lake Okeechobee. The government built a dike around it and kind of replumbed South Florida, and that changed the ecology of the Everglades because its source of water was the lake. And so for the last 100 years, we've kind of been re-engineering this part of the state, which is to say the Everglades. And so the project, which began in the 90s, was approved in 2000, and for the last quarter century has been beginning, and projects have been getting done. Was meant to cost much less. I think it's doubled in its footprint, but basically it's estimated to cost $25 billion now. And the project is essentially all of these different engineering elements of trying to get water from this lake through the Everglades and into Florida Bay. And it's this very delicate balance of where water is at certain times of year and making sure that, certain things flood and others don't. And it's basically shared by the state and the federal government. They both work on it together. They share the costs, and they're both responsible for the design of the project.
And Florida Bay, I mean, there are probably some people not 100% familiar, but that's kind of the tip of the peninsula of Florida. It is a very popular place for fishing. It's a very sensitive area. And part of the goal of this project is to ensure that it gets more fresh water. Is that right?
Yeah. So the bay is one of those very delicate ecosystems, and it's basically in between the Florida Keys and the rim of the Southern Everglades, like in the Gulf of Mexico. It's like where the state disappears into the Gulf. And it's, it's strange to hear that, but like it is salt water, but it can't be too high in salinity. Like in the 90s, there was a massive seagrass die-off from, a spike in salinity. And that's because the Everglades, which is delivering fresh water, just wasn't getting any water at all. And yes, it's the sport fishing capital of the world. I mean, the economic impact of it is vast.
So Lake Okeechobee once flowed directly south and into this area. Tell us a little bit about the role of agriculture, because obviously damming the lake prevented some flooding in terms of human lives that were lost in that hurricane when it overflowed. But there's also this balance between how much water agricultural land south of that lake is receiving.
Yeah, so I mean, initially the people that were living there in the 1920s were farming, but agriculture at that point wasn't as large. And that storm killed 2,500 people. So that dike that they built around the southern rim of the lake, it changed the ecology of Florida because, as you said, that's what provided the Everglades water. It was really the lifeblood of this ecosystem. But then agriculture in the Everglades didn't really take off until, the 60s, essentially. I mean, there was large agriculture there, but then in the 60s, sugar kind of rose as like the North Star of the Everglades, or of the Everglades agricultural area, which is essentially the central part just below the lake. And at that point, it became such a big industry that so many of the decisions around water and around Everglades restoration throughout the 70s, 80s, and 90s were geared toward this, this massive industry. I mean, it generates, I think, $3.5 billion annually and provides 100,000 jobs. But, compared to tourism, recreational tourism, the environment, all the things that are inextricably tied to the health of the Everglades, it's dwarfed by that. But the industry, the sugar industry is what I mean, is very powerful and has, always been a deft political navigator in terms of not just donating, but lobbying and, cultivating these long-term relationships that have allowed them to get water where they want it, when they want it, and, all the kind of regulations that they've been able to shape.
So I want to get more details about kind of how the Everglades Restoration Project evolved. But first, let's talk a little bit about the politics of the Everglades Foundation, because you talk about, for instance, the power of the sugar lobby, known for being very well funded, dozens of lobbyists in Tallahassee every year. The Everglades Foundation itself, in addition to putting money into science and bringing on their own strong staff of hydrologists and scientists, also was focused on political achievements or political success. Talk about its CEO and what role he had in terms of political wherewithal himself.
Well, so the same way that the foundation wanted to mirror government agencies in terms of scientific staff, it ultimately needed to do the same as far as its politics, right? So like if the sugar industry has dozens of lobbyists in Tallahassee and DC, the foundation it was brilliant that they did that, is that they also needed to mirror the amount of lobbyists. And so their CEO, who they hired in 2012, Eric Eichenberg, was the chief of staff for Governor Charlie Crist. And before that, he, worked for Congressman Clay Shaw. He ran his reelection campaign. He spent 2 years as a lobbyist. He was just very well connected between Florida and DC, and he knew how to play that game, how to curry favor. And so the foundation kind of changed when he came on. It had a pretty slim lobbying footprint. It is important to note that the foundation has a trust, which it uses to lobby, right? Because the nonprofit, the Everglades Foundation, isn't able to do that. And so they created a trust so that they could, pool this money and lobby. But with Eichenberg, it was very clear that they were, pushing back against the forces of, say, the sugar industry and trying to, get somebody to care about the Everglades. And they found that with Governor Ron DeSantis. Our previous governor, Rick Scott, just was not, as interested in Everglades restoration and took a lot of money from the sugar industry. And, it was just kind of the status quo. But in Governor Ron DeSantis, what they found is somebody that actually wanted to, change the status quo. And so, he funneled millions of dollars into Everglades restoration projects. I think on his second day in office, he asked the entire Water Management District Board to resign and, has made the Everglades kind of a centerpiece of his administration.
And that was strategic in terms of asking the board to resign, painting them as sort of friendly to the sugar lobby or overly generous in years prior. And so he was sort of establishing his own environmental bona fides. But Eric Eichenberg had a special connection. He actually, in addition to his background with the Republican Party and his work with other lawmakers, was on the transition team for the DeSantis administration. Is that right?
Yes, yeah, he was. And so what was interesting is that, of course, when you're an environmental scientific nonprofit, you have to work with who's in office. But within the Everglades Coalition, which is what they colloquially refer to as like the 60 nonprofits that are working on this project in South Florida, the coalition thought it was strange how much time Eichenberg was spending with DeSantis. And so they joked among the coalition that DeSantis, carried a cardboard cutout of Eichenberg with him as he toured around the state, because he was just appearing with him so often. But really, he was just, of course, just like I said, cultivating that relationship, making sure that this governor actually devoted time and energy to this project, and that they were successful in that. I mean, no governor has, been able to do what DeSantis has done for the Everglades.
And perhaps hasn't really shown that level of interest. I mean, we know that there have been governors in the past who took the initiative. Bob Graham, certainly. Lawton Chiles had an interest in the Everglades. There had been a lot of research done. There'd been occasional moves towards funding. And I believe the original, under Bill Clinton, I mean, he also initiated some of the restoration projects back in his term. So some of this dates way back, but this real momentum where Florida's political machinery gets going in terms of the restoration project, that really was something that was animated under Governor DeSantis.
Yeah, and I mean, he gets obviously a lot of credit, and some of it is due. I would say the most difficult thing about this is that this has been going on for 25 years. It's not like it just began with DeSantis. It was just, there's this kind of red tape gridlock, this bureaucratic delay in funding. And so what the foundation has been doing is not just creating these reports, like their work as far as hydrology is just, unprecedented. But in terms of, pushing lawmakers to act and to approve funding, that wouldn't have likely happened without a body like the Everglades Foundation. They were the ones that, pushed DC to actually break ground on these projects, because essentially the plan has been sitting there collecting dust for 25 years.
Mm-hmm. If you're just joining us, we are talking to reporter Michael Adno about his reporting on the Everglades. His most recent story examines the legal and political complexity of Everglades restoration. It's the cover of the current issue of Rolling Stone. If you have questions or comments, you can join our conversation on air at 904-549-2937, or you can go to firstcoastconnect.org to find all the other ways you can connect with us. So, Michael, when it comes to the balance of politics and science, that really came to a head. You mentioned the scientific chops that this organization had. It had done extensive work, extensive modeling. It really did hold its own in the scientific realm. And a lot of that had to do with this hydrologist who had a long history with the Everglades, dating back to his time with the South Florida Water Management District. So tell us about Thomas Van Lent.
So Dr. Thomas Van Lent, I'll just give a little bit of the backstory and then what ultimately happened, but that is the first hire that the Everglades Foundation makes in 2005. For a decade, they don't have staff. They just have, it's two founders and, a kind of skeleton crew of its board that are, collecting money and making meetings and just kind of, moving that money around and trying to, like I said, coalesce this group of other nonprofits. But when they hired Dr. Thomas Van Lent, who then was working for the Everglades National Park and had previously worked for the South Florida Water Management District all the way back to the 80s, that's when they were like, okay, we want to come up with our own reports, our own data, really study this, find the blind spots in all of these different plans and hold people accountable. And he was very well known for kind of just being, very straightforward, no jargon, and just unafraid of, what I described as like the political zeitgeist. And because he worked for the National Park Service, he didn't really have to contend with state politics. But ultimately what happened he worked for the foundation for 17 years. He resigned in 2022. And the reason is that he felt that the foundation had shifted from a science-based organization to that of a political one. And the dilemma was all about this key component of Everglades restoration, which is a reservoir. And the reservoir was meant to hold water that would, come from Lake Okeechobee, be conveyed into this reservoir, and then inexorably into the southern Everglades. And the foundation, of course, was supportive of this, as was Dr. Van Lent, who was at that point known as, the kind of foremost hydrologist working on Everglades restoration. But that project kept shrinking. And then these, as DeSantis became governor, it suddenly became, they refer to it as the crown jewel of Everglades restoration. As I say in the piece, this project then at that point was just totally mired in doubt. I mean, just so much controversy around it. And then when DeSantis came in, it was suddenly the crown jewel. It was going to be the silver bullet that could solve everything.
Can you explain a little bit about why a reservoir matters in the function of this restoration project?
The reservoir matters because the lake is the lifeblood of the Everglades water source. It needs that fresh water, and it's been cut off from that. And so what they did when they diked the lake is they created these two outlets. Basically, water goes out the east and west side to two coastal estuaries, St. Lucie and then the Caloosahatchee. One ends up in Fort Myers, the other ends up in Stewart. But that lake has this kind of legacy pollution, which is all of the phosphorus and nitrogen from agriculture, homes north of the lake, just a century of, all these residents and development polluting this lake. And when that nitrogen and phosphorus goes into those estuaries in the rainy season, which tends to be our summer, it interacts with different types of bacteria and algal blooms and basically fuels them, super fuels them. And so in 2012, there was like a massive cyanobacteria bloom on the East Coast, massive red tide bloom on the West Coast, again in 2016, and this continues. And so there needs to be a way for us not to discharge that water from the lake into those estuaries and discharge it south into the Everglades, which direly needs the water. And so the reservoir is the key component that would connect the lake to the Everglades, store that water, clean that water, and then deliver it to the Everglades. And that's, of course, why people, rightfully would call it the crown jewel.
And you mentioned these red tides or the cyanobacteria, and people may well remember that period. There was a terrible bloom of that algae in 2013 and then again in 2016. And that was national news. That wasn't just statewide news. There was comparisons to the water, looking like guacamole because the algae was so thick and deep in some of these areas that it was killing fish by the score. It smelled horrific for people who lived along those adjacent canals. And so it really was a tourism killer. It was a huge financial cost. And it was animating to people who were part of this movement. I think that there's that famous idea that you never let a good crisis go unused in politics. And so this was an opportunity of sorts for the Everglades Foundation.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and Eichenberg always refers to that, especially the 2016 bloom that you're talking about, because at that point he had been with the foundation, I guess, for nearly 4 years, and they were referring to it as the lost summer. But it was basically this, like you said, this opportunity to get Floridians who don't all really understand what's going on in the Everglades, and many have never been to parts of the Everglades, but it was a very clear way to get this message across that, like, look, this algal bloom is affecting your life. There is a solution for it, and it lies in Everglades restoration. And that's when they started to really push the reservoir idea, really try and get it, to break ground, to get the funding, to actually be dispersed. And they were able to do that very cunningly. I mean, that was, all based on that 2016 algal bloom that, like you said, made national news.
And so that helps push forward this project. The reservoir is going to function in a way that will help those pollutants settle down before the fresh water is released into the southern part of the state and down ultimately to the Florida Bay. But the size of the reservoir becomes an issue. It's changing. Can you tell us, initially there was this promise, this hope that some of that sugar cane business, that industry, that agriculture would sell some of their land, some significant portions of their land, in order to allow the construction of this reservoir. And that kind of didn't happen.
Yeah, so I mean, it's like this decades-long dance between the state and the industry, the federal government. Having like all these players just makes it so impenetrably dense. But basically, sugar growers, there are three, essentially two companies that own 500,000 acres in the Florida Everglades, and they had agreed that they would sell this land and for this reservoir that had been planned way back in 2000. And what ultimately happened is that the space for the reservoir continually shrunk. Its footprint needed to get smaller and smaller. So that didn't reduce the volume of water that it could hold, but the reservoir would become deeper.
It needed to get smaller. When you say it needed to get smaller, it was because the state couldn't get the available land that it wanted. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah, it had less and less land to build the reservoir. But the key thing about this is that the reservoir holds water that, yes, is polluted, and before it goes into the Everglades, what it needs to go through is what are called stormwater treatment areas, which are basically just natural filters. They're just these great marshlands that basically clean that water, and then as the water goes into the Everglades, it needs to meet a very stringent water quality standard. But the thing that critics and scientists and biologists, the National Academy of Science, the Everglades Foundation itself, what they were all concerned about is that there weren't enough stormwater treatment areas, is that there basically wasn't treatment capacity for the water that the reservoir would hold. And so you're going to spend $4 billion on a project that isn't, operational. Basically, they're going to build a big pool.
Oh, I got to get to a call from Ed in Orange Park. Good morning, Ed. Go ahead.
Good morning. Wonderful show. I'm sure your guests know who the Van Hool brothers are, the Van Hool family. They are actually the biggest in the sugar industry in South Florida. They have been brilliant businessmen. They also have assets outside the U.S. in mills and land and all kind of agricultural stuff. The reason that why the sugar industry has been so successful is because of the example. The Van Hool brothers live next to each other in Palm Beach. And one was big with the Republicans, big donor to the point that he can call anybody in the Republican Party and very likely they're going to answer because he's that big up there. The other brother was really big in the Democrats. So same situation, big donor and so on. So no matter what party won, they won.
That's
very
a good
smart
point. Yeah. Thanks, Ed. I mean, they are powerful. Other than the Van Hool brothers, the U.S. Sugar is kind of the other big corporation. I do want to kind of get to the issue, Michael, of what happened to Thomas Van Lent in brief, because ultimately his rift with the foundation led to a court case. He ended up in jail.
Yeah, so I mean, my piece is mostly about that. It's what happened internally at the foundation, and what happened is that the foundation relied less and less on its own science and more on its political cachet. And so the relationship that it was cultivating with Governor DeSantis was incredibly powerful. And so it was willing to, as some of its former staff say, ignore its science team in order to please the administration, because it just wanted to keep the funding going. It wanted to keep the momentum going on these projects like the reservoir. And that reservoir was the kind of central piece in this. But basically, Van Lent disagreed with Eichenberg, and it metastasized into this feud that led Van Lent to resign as their first hire, their chief scientist. After 17 years, he left the foundation, and then the foundation sued him for stealing what they referred to as trade secrets and accused him of corporate espionage. And, it was this kind of legal case that spanned years, but basically they were accusing him of taking, this proprietary information that belonged to the foundation, and that he was going to go out and enrich himself as a consultant or something like that. And then they accused him of deleting hundreds of thousands of files, basically to injure the foundation after leaving.
And he didn't necessarily dispute deleting those files. He sort of indicated he was clearing up some hard drives, but a judge ultimately found him in contempt of court and sent him to jail for 10 days.
Yeah, so it's important to note that Dr. Thomas Van Lent was never found liable for any single thing that the foundation alleged. he was found guilty of indirect criminal contempt, which means that he violated this temporary injunction that the court issued. The court basically gave this broad order that, it was meant to prevent him from deleting any more information, but it was so broad that if he used any of his devices, the laptops that information was on, his cell phone, that he would violate it. And yes, so he paid the foundation's legal fees, which, he declared bankruptcy after paying nearly $200,000 in legal fees. And then he spent 10 days in jail for the indirect criminal contempt charge.
It is a fascinating story, Michael Adno. And for our listeners, we're also going to be looking at a brighter side, perhaps, of Everglades restoration. We're going to be talking about a success story on Wednesday with the author of The Kite and the Snail, which is a new book about a symbiotic relationship that ended up ending in a very good way in the Everglades. But Michael Adno's new story is on the cover of Rolling Stone. We have a link on our website. Michael, thank you so much for being here today. Really appreciate it. Good to talk to you again.
Yeah, thanks for having me in. Have a good day.
All right. Bye. Up next, I recently had an opportunity to sit down with OneJax honoree Betty Burney about how her early exposure to segregation pushed her to advocate for education. We'll take a listen right after the break. Welcome back. Betty Burney has worked for years as an advocate for child education, development, and challenges ranging from homelessness to food insecurity. Now she's being honored with a local humanitarian award. Here to tell us about it is Betty Burney, founder and CEO of the I'm a Star Foundation and this year's 2026 OneJax Humanitarian Awards Silver Medallion honoree. Betty, good morning. Welcome back.
Good morning, Ann. Thank you. Always good to speak with you.
It's great to speak to you. And of course, big congratulations.
Thank you.
We're also joined by Elizabeth Anderson, Chief Executive Officer of OneJax. Good morning, Elizabeth.
Good morning.
So, Betty, you have been involved in child education and child development for decades now. Will you tell us a little bit about how you got your start? What first interested you in the issue of education?
The way that I got my start was really unconventional. My degrees are not in education. My degrees are in public affairs and public administration. However, I had my first child in 1987 and decided that I wanted to be his first teacher. And so I thought that was the goal, just to be my child's first teacher. Found out something totally different, because when I got in the child care arena, what I learned was that there were so many child care centers, daycare centers on the north side of Jacksonville where children were not getting a high quality education, what they needed in order to be successful when they got into school. So then it just became my mission that any child that was in my daycare center was going to leave and be prepared for first grade, able to read, able to do everything so that they could have a leg up, because I did know that education is the great equalizer. So that's what started it. I could not believe that there were child care opportunities, dollars that were being paid out to just literally allow daycare centers to house children and let them play, but not educate children.
And so you were learning about disparities as you were building a business and as you were starting to get into the field of education, but that was something that you experienced also as a young person growing up in Jacksonville during a time of segregation and really profound segregation in the educational sphere.
Yes, I literally grew up in Jacksonville I was born in 1956, so late 50s, early 60s, when segregation was the order of the day. And I will say this, though, Anne, the education that I received based on my teachers in those segregated schools, the belief that they kept instilling in all of us who were in those schools, that you had to be the best. You had to know what you were talking about. You had to become educated. You needed to get an education so you can pull your other brothers and sisters up. So although that may have been something that was meant to keep us not being on the upper end, for many of us, it gave us the upper edge because we understood the importance of getting an education.
Have you seen those challenges change? How has the dynamic shifted in your time? And even looking back to those early days of a segregated, but in some ways, a very supportive educational system for you and people you went to school with.
What I've seen and something that concerns me so much is that when I was in elementary, middle, and high school, you were challenged to be the best and you were expected to be the best. I see sometimes now that the level of expectation for children has greatly diminished. And so kids are not allowed to think as much as they should on their own. They're sort of allowed to have things basically given to them. They're being tested out, as far as I'm concerned, with not being educated up. So it's the getting everything you need for the test's sake, as opposed for education's sake, that help you become prepared on the global level.
So you went on to be a school board member, twice school board chair, also vice chair. And then after your tenure in that public service, you went on to found I'm a Star. Tell us what that organization is and does, why you wanted to start it.
So when I was on the school board, I would visit schools everywhere throughout the school board, throughout the Duval County public school system. Some of those kids were high flyers and some could barely read. It should not be that way because in my mind, we were educating the Google generation. And I read that the Google generation was the most creative, innovative generation ever because, they invented texting. Who else can invent something that no adult knows what you're talking about? So if they had that kind of ingenuity, why was it that some were at level 1 and others were at level 5? And so the I'm a Star Foundation, STAR is an acronym for smart, talented, and resilient. And that's what every child is. So the I'm a Star Foundation was designed to make sure every child understood and knew that they were smart, talented, and resilient and destined to change the world. That was supposed to only last for 6 weeks. The kids never left. So now it's 14 years later and we're still going at it. But I think the reason that we try to continue to go at it is because we need to make sure that children understand that they themselves need to be accountable, and they need to be resilient, and that they are smart. Once they understand that, there's no stopping them.
And, it's called I'm a Star Foundation, but this isn't just sort of a celebration of childhood. You have very significant demands that you make on them, and they often give their weekends to volunteering. You put them in community service roles, and they really do very specific core outreach in areas of, child homelessness and food insecurity.
We have really high expectations and demands. So, for instance, the first time that we learned in 2013 that there were students in Duval County public schools, that a significant number of them were homeless, what I said to our students is that your peers are homeless and you need to do something about it. You need to understand what philanthropy is. So you're going to raise money for them. And I'm a Star does not do bake sales. So don't come and say we're doing a bake sale and we're going to sell some cupcakes. You need to do something that's going to be meaningful and that can last. So since 2013, they've been doing their celebrity basketball games. I think that's when I first met you.
I think so.
And so they've been doing it. And to date, they have given to the school district $240,000 for homeless students that they've raised.
I just want to be clear. I wasn't in a celebrity basketball game.
Exactly. No, you were at a news station at that time.
Elizabeth Anderson, OneJax does these annual honorees, these humanitarian awards, and so many different kinds of people have been recognized. How does somebody like Betty Burney, how does that nomination process happen? How do you hope to sort of lift up their legacy and the work that they've done through this recognition?
Sure. So nominations happen typically in September. Anybody from the community can nominate anyone. And then we have a nominating team, a committee that reads through all of the nominations. And we are looking for people like Betty that have given a lifetime commitment to improving the city in the area of Northeast Florida and Jacksonville. We know that when people give of themselves from their heart, that helps us all thrive, but it also inspires other people to keep doing the work. Like Betty mentioned, people will rise to your expectations, and so when we set high standards in our community for what it means to be a neighbor, for what it means to be a humanitarian, then we can all rise to that.
Yeah. And Betty, you have since been asked and called to do all kinds of civic and public service work. Most recently, you have been involved in the Jacksonville Journey Forward. So that's a continuation of the Jacksonville Journey, which you were also a part of in some capacity. No, am I wrong?
I was sitting on the meetings, but I was not a part of the Jacksonville Journey.
Okay. But the Journey Forward is this effort to help sort of fight crime, but also build all kinds of skills. And literacy is a main focus, has been from the very beginning. How are we doing on that front?
I'm glad you asked, because the Jacksonville Journey Forward Board just recently had our board retreat. And during the board retreat, we asked ourselves some very pointed questions as to what do we want to do as a board to ensure that we are getting our young people prepared so that they can become productive citizens. And so we're looking at all age groups, and we're trying to decide, because every age in a child's life is the most important age for that child. But we're doing some things with literacy, because we know that reading is very important, especially by third grade. So we're looking at how we impact that. But then we're also looking at teens. What are we doing to impact them? What are the services out there? How can we get better services to do those things? And then on the other end, those young people who have been incarcerated or who are just coming back into the system, what do we do with workforce development for them?
And what do we do? I mean, what is the situation? We know that a lot of people do cycle in and out of custody. And in our system, there's a lot of people that are returning citizens having served their sentence. What is in place right now for educating or employing or, making that cohort a productive and appreciated segment of the society?
Well, right now, there are some agencies out there that are doing some things. We are literally looking at every piece that we can. The agency, for instance, that was started that literally helps ex-felons get jobs.
Like Operation New Hope?
Like Operation New Hope. Mm-hmm. We have partnered with them this year to make sure that we are going to be able to allow them to do a little bit more in the community so that they can help individuals get their rights back, but at the other side of it, help them get jobs.
You've also been asked to participate in a kind of a child task force. I think you scolded me the last time you were on not to call it child care. Is that right?
No, that wasn't me, but you were scolded by someone.
Okay.
But they wanted to call it early learning.
Okay, right.
Early learning task force. And that task force is so essential because childcare is expensive. And there are so many families that can't afford it. There are so many children who are going to school and they've not had any kind of preschool learning. And so as Elizabeth knows, they go in with the gap already. And as they progress, the gap just widens. So I'm really pleased. I think this child care task force is one of the best task force I've ever been on, because everybody's trying to work to find out how can we make it more accessible and affordable for parents.
You've got no plans to slow down?
No.
Elizabeth, I know that you said that you're trying to broaden the number of people and the people that are able to attend these OneJax Awards. The event itself is not until April, but tell us about who you would like to be a part of that event and who all they could expect to meet and see being honored in addition to Betty Burney.
Sure. So OneJax has been hosting the Humanitarian Awards for 56 years. This will be our 56th awards event. Of course, it helps support our programming for OneJax throughout the year, our interfaith work, our civil discourse work, and our youth work. But when we come together in celebration of humanitarians, I think we all leave inspired. And so it was really important to me that we create an opportunity for access to anybody who wants to come and celebrate. The event is at the Jacksonville Center for Performing Arts, so there's plenty of room. And this year we've created a general admission ticket, which is just the program only, and folks can find that on our website at www.onejax.org. We also have a signature access, the people that have come and done the reception beforehand with the honorees, like we do every year. But now there's another option. So there's plenty of room. We want people to come and be inspired, not only by Betty Burney, but by Stella and Angie Bayusarak, Poppy Clements, Charlie Joseph, and Tom and Kelly Coughlin, who are also being honored this year.
A great list of folks. And Betty Burney, of course, joining the pantheon of a OneJax humanitarian. Betty Burney, congratulations again. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure speaking with you.
All right. And Elizabeth Anderson, thanks so much for the work you do.
Appreciate it.
All right. Thank you. We'll be right back.
The Players' Championship returns to TPC Sawgrass March 10th through 15th. Watch the PGA Tour's top players and enjoy local bites at the stadium course in Ponte Vedra Beach. More info and tickets available at theplayers.com. Terrell Hogan Law.
I'm Wayne Hogan. Highway, hospital, home, work. Where injuries happen can make a difference in the law and the outcome.
More at terrellhoganlaw.com.
We salute a most beloved American master of stage, cinema, and TV.
I'm Dick Van Dyke. Remember.
You'll smile, you'll laugh, you'll fall on the floor with joy when you remember how he made us fall for him.
Incredible what he does with his body.
Life is like a situation.
For pure pleasure,
I had such a good time.
Join us for American Masters starring Dick Van Dyke.
Monday night at 8 on Jax PBS.
The Trump administration is building mega detention facilities in the U.S. There's a $38 billion plan to purchase industrial warehouses and turn them into warehouses for people facing deportation. DHS says conditions are humane. People who've been detained in some centers say they didn't expect to come out alive.
It's a lot of possibility to die in jail, and it's unfair.
That's on the next On Point.
Today at 11, here on WJCT News 89.9.
Government agencies are on alert for terror and cyber attacks in the United States as the war on Iran continues. But after a year of federal budget cuts, resignations, and layoffs, some national security experts question whether we're up to the task of defending against threats at home. Where is the expertise we need in times of war? Next time on 1A.
Today, starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
Welcome back. Well, it's an anxiety-laden take on modern motherhood, and it's from the award-winning production studio A24. Here to tell us about the upcoming screening of If I Had Legs, I'd Kick You is David Luckin, host of Electro Lounge and station manager here at WJCT. Hi, David.
Hi, Ann. I'm just going to say, come out and see this film. This is really, I don't want to say it's fun because it's fun and it's not fun. It's dramatic and it's funny. It's dark. And you really feel for this woman who's up for the Oscar, who's going through everything she can possibly go through that she doesn't want to go through, and you just sit there and say, "Oh, please, get her through this."
It's a dark comedy.
It is.
Yeah,
it is. Definitely worth coming out and seeing. It's a good film.
You
really
mentioned Rose Byrne, who some people will know from Bridesmaids or Neighbors, but she is recognized for her performance. She's already won a Golden Globe for Best Actress. She won an Independent Spirit Award. And now this Sunday, she's up for Best Actress for her performance.
And I hope she gets it. And this is kind of a breakout for her, too, because I believe most of what she's done has been comedies. And this isn't really a comedy. This is more drama than comedy. So it was a good stretch for her. And I think the critics really thought she did a really good job breaking out of her usual films.
Well, she is not the only one breaking out in this, because it also stars, or at least in lesser roles, Conan O'Brien and A$AP Rocky, the
Conan's
rapper.
great. Yeah, and A$AP is great. This, like I said, just come out and see it.
Yeah.
I'll probably do the introduction tomorrow night, and I'm not going to say anything about the movie. Just sit back and enjoy.
Yeah.
And before I forget, we do all these films all year long, and it's not just me. It's my partner, Cersei, who without her doing the procurement, I got the easy job. I sit home and watch all these films and say, let's screen this one. And she does all the legwork to make sure it happens. So between us.
Cersei Lenoble, she is a great asset.
And the public, because the public has given us some suggestions. Some were already on our radar, some were not. So we're really open to people telling us what they'd like to see, because we've done documentaries, film noir, classics, foreign.
You've done an
jazz.
astonishing number of films, and I'm kind of curious what goes into your calculus, because obviously you're a big music head with Electro Lounge. We know that you're a big music fan, and you've had some great films about music, whether it's the John Prine You Got Gold or The Last Waltz, which is the classic film about the band by Martin Scorsese, Summer of Soul. But you also,
some of those
you're not all music.
No, some of those are personal favorites that I try and get in the list. But what Cersei and I do is we scour the other film festivals, the Zurich, Toronto, New York, Sundance, and see what were the audience favorites, which ones won the awards. And then we try and get screeners, and then we try and bring those films to our market, because most of them haven't been seen here. Some of them are streaming, but some aren't. So we do a lot of due diligence. And a few weeks ago, I watched 6 movies in one weekend.
Wow.
2 docs, 2 independents, 2 classics.
You do your homework.
And then come back and we get pretty passionate about making these decisions,
And you also solicit, as you said, I mean, some of these come from audience suggestions,
Absolutely.
and you make that part of.
And you can go online. We have tell us what film you'd like to see. If you go to wjct.org/film, there's a button at the bottom, and it's suggest a film. And we're definitely open to.
This was initially partly motivated by the closing of Sunray Cinema
and San Marco,
San Marco, and so a place for people to see films in their own community. Right. It's a great venue. I mean, it's a beautiful screen.
We seat about 300 people, and some we've had standing room only. I
mean, you get the full experience. You do popcorn. There's a cash bar there,
and Andy Reese's,
yeah.
M&Ms, all the good stuff.
Right. So this film that is coming up obviously is in the current cycle of Oscars, but you have classic films too, and you've got the next one upcoming is a real classic from 1989.
Right, and this brings to the fore the film discovery element of all this. I had not seen Do the Right Thing. I mean, why didn't I see that? It's 40 years ago.
Right?
Brilliant film. And as soon as I saw it, it was like, oh, put it on the list. We got to show this. Visually, it's stunning the way he saturated the video, and everything is so colorful and beautiful. And the storyline is just a hot day in Brooklyn.
Yeah, that ends tragically, but is
it's kind of a true story.
It's got
not
a lot
documentary, but it has a lot of realism in
a lot of currency
Yeah.
in terms of racial tensions. It is a film chock full of stars too. Ruby Dee, Danny Aiello, John Turturro, of course Spike Lee's in it.
Yeah.
Rosie Perez. It was her feature film debut.
And was this Spike's first or second film?
It wasn't his first. I think you gotta have. She's gotta have it.
You're
was
right.
before that, but it was definitely probably his biggest first film. Yeah. So who should come to see these films? They're usually on Wednesdays, right? Not every Wednesday, but like once a month.
Mostly Wednesdays, and everyone should come because these films are really open to everyone. Whether it's a documentary on jazz on a hot summer day, or The Last Waltz, or we screened Flow animated film, which is absolutely beautiful.
You did a live version of Fleabag.
We did.
Yeah.
That's Cersei's thing. She loves finding these great NT productions. So the National Theatre in London videotapes their productions and then sends them around the world so everyone can see what's going on the stage. And you actually have a better seat than in the theater because the close-ups and things that you can do with cameras that you just can't do from your seat. We love the NT specials, and they do really well. Fleabag was like one of the biggest attended things we did here.
She's astonishing.
Yeah.
Well, the upcoming screening is of If I Had Legs, I'd Kick You here at WJCT Studios. That's Wednesday. Wednesday of this week.
Yep.
And so doors are at 6:30. The film starts at 7. Next up, Spike Lee's Do the Right Thing. That's the 25th of March. Also 6:30 and 7. David Luckham, thanks for being here.
Thanks for inviting me.
All right. And that's our program. Thank you for listening. We encourage your feedback and suggestions. You can submit either at firstcoastconnect.org, and you can also find all of our past and current shows there. And while you're there, you can sign up for the new First Coast Connect newsletter. Join us tomorrow when we ask Mayor Donna Deegan about everything from 3 a.m. bar times to increased state pressures on her administration in our monthly Ask the Mayor segment. I'm Ann Schindler. You've been listening to First Coast Connect on WJCT News 89.9.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided by Baptist Health and the North Florida TPO.
Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjax.com. The North Florida TPO is dedicated to transportation planning, funding, clean fuels, and new technologies for a vibrant, resilient, and connected region. More information available at northfloridatpo.com. The Jacksonville Symphony and principal percussionist Steve Merrill present Percussion Panorama, a program of rhythm and artistry highlighting the marimba, vibraphone, glockenspiel, and more. March 19th and 20th. Tickets at jacksymphony.org.
This is WJCT News